Welcome to the Outpost Show. We're going to get right into it. Um, we're going to be talking about the U.S. debt crisis has checkmated the Federal Reserve this recession and what's going on here. It's very hard to explain. I'm not the smart guy when it comes to tax procedures. And so what I have to do is always figure out who knows the answer. Now, I brought on Brian Kim with a clear value tax. I've shown clips of him today. He probably gave one of the most important um, amount of information, and I want to get right into it because I know you only have a few minutes, and I need your time to just watch this. And I'll make a comment afterwards, but it's kind of a long clip. Take your pen and pencil out. You're going to want to know about this. So I'm going to bring him in, and we'll go from there. And I will catch you on the other side.
I want to give you a heads up. The debt crisis has finally caught up to us. The Federal Reserve, they're going to have a very difficult time. They're going to have trouble saving us from this recession. I spoke about this previously, but I just scratched the surface. So in today's video, I'm going to go into detail and explain to you what is happening. And this is very important because your day-to-day life is going to be affected. Your job, your livelihood, your standard of living. So I think it's important that you are aware of what is about to happen to you. So here's what you know so far. You know that we're seeing the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. Interest rates are going up. And our country has been going deeper and deeper into debt to record levels, 31 trillion of debt. So you know that none of this is good news, but have you connected the dots? So what is this going to mean for you? Why should you care? I'm going to connect those dots for you. So I'm going to give you a quick history lesson because this has happened before and we came out okay, but it's going to be different this time and I'm going to explain why. In the late 70s, inflation was running at 11%. So this put the US dollar system into jeopardy. So President Jimmy Carter, he saw this as an emergency. So he nominates Paul Volcker to become the chair of the Federal Reserve. Volcker takes office in 1979. So he lets the interest rate go up to 20%. So imagine taking out a mortgage. Imagine taking out a mortgage with a 20% interest rate. So Volcker's bold move fixed inflation, but it came at the cost of a deep recession. So this created the worst recession since the Great Depression. In the second quarter of 1980, the economy shrank by 7.9%. So there was a tidal wave of businesses going bankrupt. Unemployment was at 10%. However, 2 years later, inflation falls to 5%. Unemployment falls to 8%. 6 years later, inflation falls to 2%, and unemployment falls further to 6%. So we beat inflation back then by limiting the supply of money and letting interest rates go as high as 20%. So if you think that we did it back then, so we can do it again, that is not correct. It's not possible. So do you know why? It's because in 1980, the US government had $908 billion of debt. Today, the US government is in debt by $31 trillion. As a percentage of GDP, in 1980, the debt to GDP ratio was at 32%. Today, it's 137%. So the circumstances, they are different today because over the years, we've accumulated debts and now we're in a debt crisis. So the government, so this is basically what happens. The government, they spend more money than they have coming in. The government borrows money to make up the difference. So it doesn't take a mathematician to conclude that if you keep borrowing money like this, then it's going to cause a crisis. So you know that the rate of inflation is very high. So what are we doing right now to bring down inflation? We're raising interest rates. So just think about it like this. How hot is the housing market when the mortgage rates, when interest rates are at 6%? Do you think that home prices are going to keep on skyrocketing upwards when the mortgage rates goes to 9%? Do you think that businesses are going to take out loans to invest in equipment and expand their businesses when the interest rate for them to get a small business loan or to get a business loan is at 10%? So the answer is most likely no. Higher interest rates, they're going to slow down the economy. They're going to create less demands. There's going to be demand destruction, and inflation will come down. However, here's the problem. The US government is in debt by $31 trillion. So simply put, the US government, they owe a bunch of people a lot of money. Rich people, they own government debts. Corporations, foreign countries, pension funds, etc. So the US government, they have to make interest payments on their debts. If interest rates go up, the US government, they're going to have to make higher interest payments. So they are no exception. So do you think that China or Japan, they're going to be like, oh, you don't have to pay me interest, we're good? Do you think that corporations or rich people will be like, it's okay, just pay me back another time? Do you think that pension funds, they'll be like, we don't need to pay our retirees, they're going to be fine? So no, of course not. As interest rates go up, it's going to create a big problem for the federal governments. So just think about it like this. This is very straightforward. For every 1% increase in the interest rate, that's going to be an extra $310 billion in interest payments a year for the federal government. So just use simple math. So you start off with 31 trillion in debt. So you're going to move the decimal place over 2 times to get you 1%. So 31 trillion, and then move it over once, that's 3.1 trillion, and then move it over again, that's $310 billion. So do you know how much $310 billion is? So let me put this into perspective for you. Last year in 2021, the federal government, they collected $4 trillion in income. $2 trillion came from individual income taxes. $1.2 trillion came from Social Security and Medicare taxes. $370 billion came from corporate taxes. The remainder, they came from excise, estates, and other taxes. So $4 trillion in total. Last year, the federal government, they spent $754 billion on national defense. So that's a good amount. That's about 19% of the money that they have coming in. In 2021, the federal government, they spent $352 billion to pay interests on their debts. So that's very little, relatively speaking. And that's possible when interest rates were at 0.25%, which is close to zero. Again, for every 1% increase in interest rates, the government, they're going to have to spend an extra $310 billion a year on interest. If the interest rate goes up by 1.5%, the federal government, they're going to be spending more money on their interest payments than on national defense. So just think about that. Let that sink in. Under Volcker, we had the flexibility to raise interest rates to 20% because the federal government had less debt. Now we have more debt, and that is no longer an option for us. So do you understand what I'm saying? The math, it doesn't work out. Raising interest rates to 20%, that's not even on the table anymore. That is out of the question. If we raised interest rates to 20%, that would be over $6 trillion a year in interest expense alone. So raising interest rate to 10%, that is not even possible. That would mean 3.5 trillion in interest payments a year. And again, the government collects 4 trillion a year. If interest rates were 5%, the government would be spending half their money on interest payments alone. So that would leave very little money left over for Social Security, Medicare, defense, healthcare, social services, etc. The current interest rate set by the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate, is at 1.75%. They raised it 0.75% in June. So that's why I was saying that it was a big deal. The rate was at 0.25% last year. The Federal Reserve, they're trying to get the interest rate to 3.75% to stop inflation. But you have to remember that Volcker, he had to spike interest rates to 20% to stop inflation. And this time, we're supposed to get the job done with 3.75%. That's going to be difficult. So the sad thing is that even 3.75%, that would cause the federal government's interest payments to increase to $1.5 trillion. So that's double the amount that we would spend on national defense. That would be 37% of what the government collects. So we kept just kicking this can down the road.
You see what's going on? Time to do your research, guys. Listen, that's all I'm here for, is to get to the truth. Hope you can find it. See you next time.